Hello, and welcome to the North Carolina Museum of History and the 26th Annual American Indian Heritage Celebration. The presentation will begin in just a moment, but we want to begin with a few notes. Please remember to ask questions in the chat, and we'll do our best to respond to them and share with our presenter or our panel. We have many additional resources about American Indians in North Carolina on our website. We would like to thank the following sponsors of the North Carolina Museum of History Foundation who have helped to make this event possible. And let's begin.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Sharon Harris Barroon. I am from the Sappony Indian tribe of Hollister, North Carolina, and I will be your hostess for today. The first presenter we have with us today is Miss Shelia Wilson, and she is a member of the Sappony tribe, and she's also a filmmaker whose Sappony Quilts Cover of Love explores her tradition and her tribe's tradition of quilting. Ms. Sheila is extremely knowledgeable about indigenous cooking, fishing, farming, and singing. At this time, I present to you Ms. Shelia Wilson.
Good morning, everyone, and thank y'all for being here. My name is Shelia Wilson. I'm a member of the Sappony tribe. I live in Burlington, but our tribal community is in Person County, North Carolina, and Halifax County, Virginia. We actually had one school that Indians, our American Indian people that lived in Virginia came to North Carolina to school across the state line, and they one bus went and picked up, or maybe more than one bus picked up the children and brought them to our High Plains American Indian School. And today I am going to share with you the Three Sisters story. This is a story I love. It's just, it touches on gardening. It touches on humanity. It helps us realize things that I'll share with you in a little bit. But how many think the Three Sisters are the mountains in New Zealand? How many think the Three Sisters are Kathy, Elizabeth, and Michelle, my daughters? As American Indians, we knew that we could plant the Three Sisters, corn, beans, and squash in one hill. And we didn't have to plant those long rows. We could just plant them in a hill together, and they live together, and they actually help each other. First, the corn stalk. She grows tall. And as she grows tall, the pole bean vine grows up on the stalk and gets up where it can get a lot of sunlight and protection from the rabbit, who gets the ones on the bottom. Because we want to help the rabbit make it to the time to eat. We eat him later. So we have the squash, which is so important because the squash, she has these big green skirts, which are leaves that help hold in the moisture. And so everybody has water to drink. So everybody, by being different and having a different talent and coming together and living together, survive. And that's what's so amazing about this story, is because there's a reason these three can live together. And because as American Indian, we knew science enough to know that the bean has nitrogen on its roots, little nitrogen balls on its roots. Corn loves nitrogen. And so when corn has nitrogen and it won't burn its roots, and the squash with the holding in the moisture, all three of them are called sisters. And the I wanted to show you today. This is a story skin. You know, American Indians used story skins to save stories. And so I thought, well, I'll do that. I'll write the Three Sisters story, and I'll draw it. And my daughter, Michelle, helped me with these. But you can see right here, there's the corn, there's the bean, and there's the squash. And they all grow together, and they all help each other and one heal. Now, a lot of the story skins, I think, are used to save stories for the next generations. You know, because you've got a great story about how your uncle saved a family that was on a canoe and saved them and from drowning. You would use a story skin for that. So this is a way that you could pass down your history and by putting it on a story skin. Now, I don't know if you know, but this is a squash. This is a butternut squash, and it is so good. And what I love about these is that you can dress them up and make them a dessert, or you can dress them down with just olive oil and salt and pepper, and you've got a really good vegetable. It just depends on what you decide you want to do with the squash. And maybe just a few weeks ago, you were digging these seeds out of a pumpkin, because pumpkin seeds look just like these squash seeds, just bigger. And you'll see them when you pull them out, when you're carving your pumpkin, that they look like these because a pumpkin is a squash. And you know we do lots of things with pumpkins. Now, I got these old jars here that I brought today that I've inherited, and I really don't know if they're my grandma's, my aunts, but they inherited down as people passed from, and if you look underneath, you probably see that this one, these kind have ceramic in them. You see that? That's pretty cool, isn't it? Because that's the way that they canned. Now, when I was a youngin', my job always was to shell the beans, you know, and go in the garden and work, you know, and stuff. And so that's how I learned a lot about, look at the drunk. That's how I learned a lot about my growing. And I want to tell you this, my mama made a mistake one time because somebody gave her some really good chicken manure that had dried out. Mm-hmm. And she put it, we had around the squash plants. And you see here, the squash, this one didn't grow very tall. But that year the mama put the chicken manure on, they grew up to here. I mean, I was 12 years old and they were up to my waist. They was the biggest leaves I ever seen. And it was zucchini squash. So we had zucchini, everything. Mama put spaghetti sauce on it. Mama put butter on it. Mama would cook it in the oven, or she would fry it up. You know, we had too many, and I asked Mama the next year, please don't put no more chicken manure on there. That's just too many. But so I always say she made a mistake that year. She didn't mean to really grow that many. And if you look over here, you see these other jars. See how tall these jars are? Well, we didn't put a lot of things up in these jars because these jars that we canned had to go under the bed. We never had a space, you know, like an extra cabinet to put the jars in. You had to make so many, put so many up that under the bed was where Mama would store them and Grandma would store them. So I never knew that you could throw shoes under the bed because we always had Okay, so now anybody can tell me what this is? You can tell me later, I'll look at the chats. But it's a tobacco horse. And tobacco was very important and it wasn't the villain it is now. I work hard to keep people off of young, especially youngins, off of cigarettes, because I know it's just not good for them. But we had it as it was a cash crop for us, and we used to go in the barn and smell the curing of the tobacco, and it smelled good. But cigarettes don't smell good. So by the time they get it off of the and get it off the vine and treat it and put it in a cigarette, they done added chemicals and things that our bodies just don't need. It's not pure like it used to be. But this was thing you'd have to hand the person 3 leaves at one time, and they take the rope and go around and hang it up, the tobacco twine, and hang it up, one on this side, one on that side, one side there. And you had to reach, as the leaf handler, you had to reach and get 3 at one time, hand it to her, 3 or 3, because you had to put it in the spot where she wanted it. And it was a bonding experience in a lot of ways, because you had to have help. And a lot of times they call it farming out. Well, Uncle Jess is putting in a barn, you need to go over there and help him. And, then you would get paid and you'd get lunch, as it was. But we, in our community, we actually always done things together. And that's one of the main reasons we survived. When all others were actually assimilated, we, Sappony, where we were, no one wanted to live there, and we did. And no one, we were kind of like protected, because we had our own church, we had our own school. And so with those things, you can, with your own gardens and you share and stuff, they used to make Brunswick stew. And it was, well, we still make it. We still have it. It's one of our tribal traditions to make it, but because of Corona, we haven't had it in 2 years. But what you do is somebody brings this, somebody brings that, like corn, tomatoes, butter beans, and the person in the community that had like the highest standing, they would donate the beef, because most people didn't have a cow, a beef cow. They might have had a Jersey cow, but they didn't have a milk cow. But they would donate the meat, and we would come together and we cook it in these big old pots with wood underneath, and you've got to stir it all the time while your legs are getting hot because you're near the fire. But it's such a good time. Everybody looks forward to it being together. And I heard stories of the corn shuckings they used to have. And I think that was more for idea of couples getting together, is more like a dating tradition, where you could come with somebody to the corn shucking, because everybody was going to be there and was going to be watching you. Yep. And they had, the way the Brunswick stew, my mama told me, was divided up, was the person who had the most children, would get the most jars. They didn't have to bring the most. They just had to bring what they had to share. And that's the way it was divided up. Now it's a fundraiser for our tribe to keep our tribal center going, to continue the work we do with all the youth. We have a Sappony camp for our youth, and we've had children come in from Turkey, where they were stationed, their parents were stationed. We've had them come in from California. In this way is how we're actually building back our community, because these children probably wouldn't have ever come back, if we didn't have this community youth camp. And the youth camp is actually now started. We've been doing it 20 years, and we've started having some of the youth come back and be leaders in our tribe now. We have people that where there's first night campers. I get the first night campers because I sing to them. it's not that I sing wonderful. It's actually that they have to go to sleep to get away from the noise. But I always get the first year campers. My grandma Jewel taught me many things to help children go to sleep when they're in new places. And it works for us and works for them. And at our tribal youth camp, we're actually trying to bring back or spread our language. And the children catch on to this way faster and they understand. And one time, Martin was doing a class and he was over there. I was doing something else and he goes, Otho. And that's the word for green and Tudlo. And I turned and looked because my uncle's name was Otho. And then his son, but is named OC. But when he said that, I was like, I know that word. And so now I've been looking for other words that sound familiar, like they were people's names, from olden days. And you can see how it is spelled, how it's pronounced, and so you can write it. So this is a great workbook. And I'd like to thank Martin for all his work on making this. And there's one of our squashes. There's one of our beans. Now, see those little, that's the flower that comes out. And then that turns into a bean. You see these leaves? There's leaves in there. Because every plant has different, to go walking and identify them on the path. These strawberries. And so we're working, there's corn. I just magically found it. There's corn and my favorite, sunflowers. Yep.
So, Miss Sheila, you have talked to us so much about the traditions and ways of the Sappony people. We've heard about the Three Sisters. We've heard about tobacco, and of course the storyboard on the skins, and all of that is so interesting. You even talked a little bit about the preparation of the food. Tell me, where did you first hear the story of the Three Sisters?
Well, I worked in the garden with my grandmother, and the first story I remember her telling was about we would put 3 seeds in one heel, either to squash or, because they help each other grow. And then later, where ones that didn't come up, we would transplant them out. And she goes, now, I said, Grandma, why do we put 3 in here? So there's a scientific reason, but then there's a reason she made me think about it. 1 for the rabbit, 1 for the crow, and 1 for me. And that way you think about other things besides yourself, and supporting nature. Like I said about the rabbit, getting the pole beans at the bottom, and because you want to feed the rabbit and the rabbit feeds you later. Now, I love rabbit gravy, and I'll eat rabbit, but the bone's kind of little, but I do love, if you got a biscuit and you pour some rabbit gravy over it, it's heaven. It's so good. The flavor is so wonderful. But Grandma didn't make you eat things you didn't like. Like she would cut up cucumbers and put vinegar in the bowl with them and some salt and pepper. And everybody loved it, but I didn't. And so she would make me a little bowl of cucumbers. It was with water, and I loved it that way.
Well, while we're talking about meals and preparing meals, what are some of the recipes that we can combine the Three Sisters together to make a meal, and incorporating the story of the Three Sisters and passing those traditions on, as well as consuming the Three Sisters?
Yes. Well, what I loved Grandma would do is we would mix vegetables. Basically what it is, because like you'd have a bowl full of tomatoes the night before, and you have some black-eyed peas or some purple hull peas, and then you'd have a little bit of something else, and Grandma would mix them together, and that was our mixed vegetables. Fancy sounding, but it was just what it was just mixing together what you had, and so I remember Grandma telling the story about hominy. My granddaddy told her if she served him hominy one more time, he was going to throw it out the window. And she had hominy next time, plain. And so then he did throw it out the window. He literally threw it, and hominy's not easy to make, throwed it out the window. And so then she started mixing the hominy, which is corn, a way of treating the corn, that in with the other vegetables and the tomatoes, and he liked it. But he liked it warm. He didn't like it cold. But almost everybody else now serves it cold because you use it as a dip. But when we were youngins, and my grandma and granddaddy were married so long ago, that they used hominy a lot, because hominy has a lot of carbs in it, and that gives you energy to do what you need. So I remember that story. So when I made the Sappony salsa recipe, I called it salsa because I thought it sounded better than mixed vegetables. But Sappony salsa had to have hominy in it, and it has corn, beans, and squash in it.
Great. Another question for you, Miss Sheila. Of course, we are certainly enjoying the talk about the Three Sisters story, and of course, how we can consume it. Why are corn, beans, and squash so significant to the Sappony people, and in the legend of the corn, beans and squash, the Three Sisters story? What's so special about that?
Well, actually, they are very nutritious, and they are sustainers of life. Because if you have just corn, beans, and squash, you can survive the winter, because beans have protein in them. Mm-hmm. Corn has the carbs that give you energy. That's right. And the squash has vitamin C in it. So that's why, squash is harder to keep, but if you got the jars and put it in it. But you used to put, you dry out corn and you save it, and then put water in it and boil it up, and you'd have corn. And if you grind it with a mortar, in a bowl, or there's a traditional, like you get like a tree trunk, and you have a mallet, and you grind your corn down. You can make cornbread, and you can make grits. Most grits are made out of white corn, but there's a lot of things you can do with that. And in the beans, the string beans, you can actually put them in a pot and boil them, and then they take the dry beans and make you like a flour, kind of dripping, not solid, but it kind of a little bit runny. And you put it on top of the beans once the water gets a little bit low, and you cook that bread on top. You could use biscuits, but you cook it on top, and it steams it up, and that bread tastes like beans. And you're like, this is really good. So you can find different ways to serve them, but they are sustainers, and they will keep you going if you get down to just the three of them.
That sounds great. And as you are speaking, I hear you so often talk about what mom or grandma shared with you, which brings the thought to my mind how important our elders are and those stories that they pass to you. Because just look at what you're doing today. You're sharing those stories with others that came from your ancestors, and we can certainly appreciate that. Could you tell us what other plants are very important to the Sappony people?
Yes, you can see on our Sappony emblem here, you can see that that's wheat, tobacco, and corn. Those were the ones that we corn, to feed ourselves and our livestock. Tobacco was a cash crop, and wheat. Also, we grew wheat and sold wheat and made flour with it. So it all comes back to thinking of the word, to the connection that they had all along with us. You know, you can, if you got, you know, these things shows just how important they are. That in modern times we designed our flag, that we put all of these symbols on there, but you see the, you know, like I said a while ago, tobacco straight off isn't bad. It's the things that they put in it, and in cigarettes, and in chewing tobacco, you know, and in cigars. You know, it's those things that the process they go through after they leave that barn that makes them bad. You know, and I just want our youth to know that even though my mama said that even though tobacco was a big product in our community, a really important part of our community surviving, that hardly anybody smoked. It wasn't often, most of the time, until they went off into wars, that they would come back with cigarettes. Like the cigarettes, tobacco we had didn't compute to them to be in cigarettes, but then when they got out, and especially with the stress of war, they would come back addicted to cigarettes, you know.
Yes, and that's so interesting because as Native people, tobacco is a very important herb within our culture. Of course, Ms. Sheila, as you know, we have the 4 sacred herbs, and tobacco is one of those herbs. And as far as tobacco in its traditional use, it was given as a gift and sign of honor. So it was very important to our people. And of course, you know, a lot of times it became a part of our livelihood, correct?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. Yep.
Okay.
Many beautiful barns around our communities, our American Indian communities, and still standing today because that was a form of art, you know, putting up a barn, making it look nice, and keeping around it clean, you know, weeds and stuff, you know. They weren't just stuck out in the back pasture and left alone. Took pride in your tobacco barn. This is quilt behind me. Reminds me of the quilt that my cousin Gerald was telling me that his mom and dad used to take out to the tobacco barn when they had the fire going out there, and it was from wood. They go out there to keep the fire going, and they would sleep under that blanket out there right at the tobacco barn to keep the fire going. And but I thought that was that quilt's job. It was the tobacco barn quilt. You didn't get under it. You didn't play on it. You didn't. It was put over to the side and just used for that. And that's a super nice thing to think about, that you have a quilt that your mom and daddy laid under out of the back barn. Necessity told them they had to go out there, or maybe they just wanted some time away from the youngins.
Well, also while we're talking about the barn and even down to the farming and the 3 sisters, a lot of times that wasn't just work for the Native people. Can you speak on how we came together socially to get things done? And you kind of touched on it when you talked about the corn shucking. I can remember as a little girl sitting on my grandma and grandpa's front porch and the whole family coming over, and we had to shuck corn together. But that wasn't just work, it was social time for us and support time, you know. So would you speak a little bit on some of those ways?
I remember someone would go fishing, and my grandmother was a widow when she was pretty young, and they would go fishing and they would bring grandma 1 or 2 fish. You know, she had 5 children, and So they just would stop by with some things they got out of their garden, you know. And then Grandma loved to pray. And everybody knows that you want to be on Miss Jewel's prayer list. Every night she talked to Jesus. Every night you could find out what was going on in the family by listening to her praying, because she'd tell you what she was telling God, and she was telling you what was going on. If you would just listen, you would know that that Connie was sick. She was over in Turkey with her family serving in the army, and she was sick and got the telegram that said she was sick and that she was very sick, to get a telegram to Grandma. And Grandma prayed and prayed, and not just in her mind, she verbalized it, and you could hear every night you go off to sleep. Some nights her list wasn't as long, but most of the time she was praying for everyone that was stationed overseas in the Army. When Vietnam War, that's the age that I remember her naming everyone in the community who was at the Vietnam War, and she prayed for them. And then, like, if somebody just, had to go to the dentist, in our community, that's a big thing back then, going to the dentist and getting, because sometimes, it didn't always come out right. They weren't always treated fair at the in town. It's much better now, but it's not completely gone. There's little things happening just because you're American Indian, just because you're part of the Sappony tribe, just because you have your summer tan all year long. And that's one of the reasons that I speak now and say, we are here. We're still here. Us as American Indians haven't been completely wiped out, which is, we hear a lot here at the History Museum, people coming up saying, well, I didn't know till I seen this in the paper that there was any American Indians in North Carolina. But I live in Alamance County, and I've met Inuits, I've met Navajo, Pueblo, just being through school and things. And our closest tribe, Dokenichi, they have a lot of children in Alamance schools. So when I go into schools and do presentations and we do story skins, they'll raise their hand and say they're American Indian, and our teacher will be like, I didn't know that. So that's what I'm trying to do, is continue like my grandma did. That's why I'm speaking, even though I am so nervous.
Well, you're doing a wonderful job, and just sitting listening to you, the stories of the things that you've learned from your mom or your grandmother, it tells me that, of course, over the years you've learned so much. And where the jars are concerned, can you tell us a little bit about the process of canning those foods?
Yes, I can, because one year it was my job to do the math and figure out how many jars had to be put up so we'd have string beans all year. See, algebra comes in handy, because, the 3 over the 2, and then you take, anyhow. So you would first pick your string beans, and then you go and you wash them really good, no dirt on them. And you clean your jars. You have to sterilize them, which means you got as hot of water as you boiling can, and roll your jars in there, and then you set them on the dishcloth so that they stay nice and clean, because that's the main thing that's going to save and your beans, and so they'll be ready for you on in Christmas. When you got company coming over, you can open 3 jars string beans, because you got them saved up. So then you would clean the lid. You put the string beans in there, and you clean the lid around the edge with another dishcloth. And my grandma always liked to put Rick Rack on hers. So if you had one of grandma's washcloths, you had It had rickrack on it. And then you put half a spoonful of salt in the middle, make sure it doesn't touch anything, put it back, fill up the thing with hot water, put your lid on and put it in a pot, a canning pot with a rack in it. And you didn't have to go to the gym. Putting these up, you had to pick them up when they're full and bring them out and let them cool. And when they start cooling, you would hear it, because in the new kind actually has a metal and a rubber on it that goes around rubber sealant that seals it, and it goes boop when it pulls it in and it's sealed. So all day long after you done cooked them and you set them aside and let them cool, when they cool just enough, you hear that boop, and you're like, oh, that's music to my ears. I done it right. But then you go back over and you push it down, and if it stayed down, it was good. But then if it popped back up, it would make as loud. It would go poop, poop, push it down. Those beans are going to save. You better go ahead and cook them tonight for supper. But most of the time after you've learned to make sure and really have your items clean, then you got better at how many set. But when we done peaches, I never minded when one or two didn't seal, and we got to eat them that night, because peaches are so good. And we made a lot of jellies too. My favorite is citron preserves. And a lot of people don't know what a citron is, but it's like a watermelon, but it doesn't get red in the middle, and it's very hard. And you can take a citron and you can throw it on the ground and it'll bounce. But you do that to watermelon, you're just going to have messed up watermelon, but a citron won't. It's tough. It is almost like the whole, what's the word for the rind that's inside the watermelon, where you stop eating. That's the way it looks inside. But we had a lot of citrons on the side of the tobacco fields and cornfields and stuff. And my Aunt Verl, she put up the best citrons, and she always made some for me, because she knew those are my favorite. A lot of people, you like them or you don't, But I love citron preserves, and haven't had any since Aunt Verl passed. But I still remember how great they tasted on our biscuits.
Ms. Sheila, in talking about canning the vegetables, after you've canned everything, is there a specific time frame that you have to wait before you can actually open the cans and eat them? How does that work?
Well, we've had some that were 2 or 3 years after canning. As long as you touch them and they'll pop back up, you can eat them.
Miss Sheila, I would like to share some gratitude and some questions that have come through the chat.
Sure.
So Mary Lou says, this is so interesting and you are such a great teacher. Jeff says his kids attended virtually from Alabama. So that's amazing. Welcome, Jeff. Edwina Jones says, this is just so enjoyable. And Rhonda says, thank you for sharing your stories. And Fran is asking how large the hills were. And Fran, if you'd like to clarify your question in the chat, if I'm misunderstanding you, but I'm thinking you mean how large were the hills when you plant the Three Sisters?
Right. So my judgment is this high.
Okay.
You just have to find a sunny place. But now a lot of people do the Three Sisters in buckets. And there's videos of people showing you how to grow the Three Sisters in a bucket. You won't get as big a yield. But like if you live in an apartment and there's a sunny end to one of your parking spaces, everybody could put out a bucket and put them close together, and y'all could have the Three Sisters to share together and build a community bond, growing vegetables and things out of your 5-gallon bucket in your parking lot.
And then Stacy is asking, did you have any pests like squash bugs? If so, how did you get rid of them?
Well, there's all kind of pests all the time. Like do you know that if you plant marigolds with tomato plants, that the marigolds actually keep the bugs away from the tomato plants? by their flowers. And so, but we went out in our garden every day. You had to get what is right, and to keep you'd have to hoe it up and keep the heel up, and you'd have to keep the weeds down so everything could grow. And usually if you see bugs, you there's a guaranteed way that it'll work. You take one piece of wood, about a 2x4, 4x4, size a block, and then you take the other piece of block about the same size, and you squish that bug in between there. Those bugs are going to go away. When you kill them, they're dead. So that's usually the way we found a lot of them. We would look and see what was eaten, because the beans have beetles that come after them, and you have to eradicate them. And it wasn't like if you planted enough and your squash started having some issues, you pull it and you plant another a lot of times.
We have another comment. Patricia says, thank you so much. I love to hear you speak about traditions and sustainability. My dad taught me about gardening and marigolds and such compatibility. So thank you, Patricia. Thank you all for your wonderful comments and questions.
All right. Just one final comment. What would you like for people to take away or learn from your presentation today?
I want you to think about the difference, how different corn is, how different beans are, how different squash are, and how each of them's talent brought together helped each other and grow and feed you. And the world is the same way. If you accept the differences is going to make it better. It's going to make the world better. It's going to make you better. Because everybody doesn't have to have a mirror to look in to see their self. You look and you see and you listen and you talk and you come together, and you will be stronger. Your community will be stronger. The world will be stronger by embracing the differences. That's the main thing the Three Sisters tells us.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much, Miss Sheila. We have thoroughly enjoyed your talk here today, and I know that everyone has learned so much. We certainly appreciate it. And on behalf of the American Indian Heritage Celebration, we want to say thank you, Pilahuk, in the language of the Sappony people, the Halawa-Sappony. And we hope that everybody enjoyed the presentation, and be sure to stick around with us for our next presentation, which starts in about 12:30.